Hi, welcome back. In this code along exercise, we're going to add some background styles to our nav bar and our main sections. Let's start off by opening up the terminal. And I'm going to change directory into my exceptional real estate folder. We'll quickly check the git status. Looks like the working directory is clean. I'll see which branches we have here. And I think I'm going to create a new feature branch. And we'll go ahead and call this one navbar and background styles. Okay. And then let's go ahead and bring up Sublime Text. Awesome. So I did a little bit of organization here. In the index page, I added another element here, which is the div with the ID of navbar. And I gave both the navbar its own wrapper, and I also gave the logo div here its own wrapper as well. So these guys are both inside the header. I decided I'm going to make the header section here. We're going to add a nice shadow to it, and we're going to set the logo section to actually be positioned below the nav bar. We're going to make the nav bar fixed instead of making the entire header fixed. And that way we'll always have the navigation visible, and you'll see the logo at the top of the page, but as you scroll down, you'll just have access to the navigation bar. Okay. And I went ahead and cleaned up the code on some of the other pages as well. I went back and added some of the positioning classes that we had set previously in the last exercise. And I also cleaned up the CSS file. So I'll go ahead and bring up style.css here. And I removed some of the other comments about the selector types, and I just added these general bookmarking type of comments here where I just basically set a section for all the global styles. Here's where we'll be creating some classes for the different backgrounds that we'll be adding in. And I also labeled here all the different sections, such as the header, the nav bar that we're going to create, etc. So to get started, let's go ahead and bring the index page up in the browser. And let's talk about some of the things we want to change here. So previously, in order to demonstrate positioning and column structure, we had given these guys just a background color of gray. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this background color off of these elements here. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to add a wood texture behind all of this content. I have a nice image of some white stained wood, and that's going to be really slick to put back behind there. We're also going to add some drop shadows onto these sections here. We're going to add some gradients here for the details section, which is the section on the bottom here. I'm going to add a nice little border on the right edge to draw kind of a vertical rule in between each column. And we'll also be, as I mentioned, updating the navigation bar. So I'm going to position this nav bar on top of the logo, and I'm going to make it fixed to the top of the screen at all times. And we're going to kind of make these individual links look more like buttons. So I guess we'll start off with creating some shadows for these elements. So let's jump back over to Sublime Text. And I'm going to go back into style.css. And as I mentioned, we do have these background colors that were initially created just to kind of show the edges of our column structure. And we don't really need these anymore. So here where we have .column1, I'm going to remove this background color here. And this guy .column2, we're going to remove that gray background color there. And same thing with the column3. We don't really need that in there for right now. Okay. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and apply a shadow. So I'll create a class of shadow, and I'll be able to apply this to any element where I'm interested in having a box shadow. And here the first value is the horizontal positioning. So I'm going to set this to 0 so that it's centered on the element. And then the vertical, I'm going to set this to 3 pixels. So this means that it will make the shadow fall 3 pixels below the element that I apply it to, and it won't be off to the sides because I have the horizontal set to 0. And then we'll go ahead and set the blur radius to 10 pixels. And then we're going to give it the color of a dark gray, which is pound 333, like that. And we'll go ahead and save. And the cool thing about this is now I can just simply apply the shadow to all of my sections. So I'll go back to the index page here, and we'll go down to our main section. And this guy has a class of column 3 first. And I'll just put a space, and then I'll add shadow in here. So now it is column-3 space first space shadow. And this will add a shadow to this section here. So we'll get to see a little drop shadow right under this section. And we'll go ahead and add a shadow to all the main sections. And that's going to make them pop nicely on top of the wood texture we're going to add in a moment. So we'll go ahead and say shadow there. And that'll do it. So now you can see these guys have a slight drop shadow. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add some borders on the right hand side of these 2 columns. So let's go ahead and create another global class here. I'm going to jump back to style.css, and let's go ahead and say border dash right. And now anything I apply this border right style to is going to have a border on the right hand side, and we'll set this to 1 pixel dotted, and we'll make the color a medium gray, just like that. And we'll also add some padding on the right hand side too, to keep some space between the content and the border itself. So I'll say padding dash right 30 pixels. Okay, and then we'll jump over to the index page, and we want to apply this to the first 2 columns in the details section here. I'll just go to the first one here, which is column dash 1 space first, and we'll say space border dash right to apply the border on the right hand edge. And I also want to apply it to the second column here, which is this next one over here, which is the links column. So we'll go ahead and save, come back to the browser, and refresh. So that's pretty subtle, but you can see there's a dotted gray line here on the right hand side, and this creates a nice division between these 3 columns here. Next, let's go ahead and add the background texture of the white wood. So the wood is going to start here at the top of the page. It's going to go behind the header, which eventually we're going to style the navbar and header to have their own gradient. But we'll basically see that wood texture will be starting here at the top, and then it will go behind all of these main sections, and then it's going to stop right here just before the details section. And then I'll add my own background gradient for the details section in the footer down here at the bottom later on. So let's jump back to Sublime Text, and you can see that in the images folder there's an image called white-wood.jpg. And I'd like to go ahead and create a class for that at this time. We'll go into backgrounds, and I'll go ahead and create the class of white-wood. So anything I apply this class to is going to have that background. And we'll go ahead and set the background URL, and we'll have to say .. to leave the CSS folder, and then images / to go into the images folder. And again, the picture name is white-wood.jpg. Okay, and since this is the shorthand background property, I also have the ability to set this guy to no-repeat, meaning that the image will not repeat. And we also want to position it here, so I'll just go ahead and say center top. All right. And the other thing we want to do is set the size. So I'll go ahead and say background dash size. And I want this to take up all of the screen. So no matter what size of screen, I want this background texture of the wood to just fill up all the available space. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to background dash size cover. So we'll go ahead and save that. And I've already added this div on the other pages, but I'll show you where it goes on the index page here. So let's see, so the social section is positioned over to the right. We don't have to worry about that. But then here above the header, I'm going to go ahead and add a new div. And we'll go ahead and give this a class of white dash wood. Okay. And then we need to indent all of this stuff here, whoops, all the way down to the wrapper, where the wrapper closes just before the details section. That's where we're going to close out the white wood. So I'm going to do command and close bracket to indent everything, and then we'll go over here and we'll close out the white wood div. And here you can see the comments are coming in quite handy, because now I can tell that the wrapper is closing here, and then this is the div that's closing the white wood. So white wood will stop just before the details section, and it will be behind all of these sections. So the way we place a background image behind another element is we basically wrap the other elements with a parent element. So this parent will have a background texture of the white wood, and then because these are children that are nested inside of it, they will automatically appear on top of that background texture. All right, so let's go back to the browser and we'll hit refresh. Cool, so now we can see that white wood texture filling in behind all the sections. And we're going to have to go ahead and give these sections a background color of white in order to make the text stand out a little better. So we'll just jump back over to Sublime Text, and we'll go down to the section, main section area. And for all the main sections, I'm just going to add a background of white. So we'll have the color white there. I'm going to save and refresh. Excellent. Okay, so next I'd like to create some nice gradients that will appear. I'm going to have a gradient that's behind the nav bar and the logo, which is going to have this like nice subtle fade from gray to white and then back to gray. And down here in the details section, I'm also going to have a nice gradient that fades behind these columns here. And then I'll have some nice gray color down here at the bottom and maybe a border on top of this footer section. So I've already gone ahead and went to this site here. Remember, if you do a Google search for CSS gradient generator, they have all these different sites. I just chose this one, Colorzilla, and here you can make your own custom gradients and copy and paste the code that it creates for you here. Now I've already gone ahead and created a couple different gradients. I did a light fade and a medium gray fade, and I've gone ahead and copied them and I pasted the code here into this text file, so we can just paste these guys into our own classes. I'm just going to copy the first one here labeled light fade, and I'll just copy that, and I'm just going to paste this here into the background section. And we'll go ahead and create a class for it called light-fade, and we'll just paste in all of that gradient code there. Cool, and this one has all the different prefixes for browsers old and new, and also has the filter property for IE. Okay, and we'll also create one called medium fade that we'll be able to apply. That'll be just slightly darker variation. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back to that text edit file, and I will copy the medium fade, and we'll just paste it in. So I just, did this ahead of time just to save some time there. Okay, and we'll go ahead and save that. All right, and now what we want to do is come back over to the index page, and we just want to apply those. So I'm going to go up to the header at the top of the page here, and let's go ahead and give the header a class of medium fade. medium dash fade, and that will add that background gradient. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a shadow. Let's add that shadow class also to make a drop shadow on the header. And we'll go ahead and go down here to the nav bar. And for the nav bar, I want to give it a light fade. So just add the class of light fade onto the nav bar there. So we'll go ahead and save that. And if I scroll down to the bottom here, down in the details section, we're going to go ahead and add the class of medium fade here into the details section. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and save that. We'll jump back to the browser and we'll refresh the page here. Cool. So here you can see in the details section, this has the medium fade, which is fading from a darker gray to a lighter gray. Fades out here at the bottom. Okay. And then if we scroll up to the top here, you can see that I have a light fade, which currently is a little hard to see, but we're going to end up making this navigation bar larger here. We're going to kind of make these links look like boxes, kind of turn them into buttons here for the navigation. But this is the light fade, which fades from gray to white to gray. And then you can see the medium fade here happening inside the header section. Okay, so let's jump back over to Sublime Text. Okay, so let's go back over to style.css, and we're going to scroll down to the header section here, and let's go ahead and set the header, and we'll go ahead and give this guy a margin, and we're going to set the margin to 0 on the top, 0 on both sides, but we're going to add 30 pixels of margin on the bottom, which will give a nice space here between the top of the header and the first section here. So now we can see a space here, and we're able to see a little bit of that wood texture in between. And then let's go down into the nav bar section here, and let's start setting some positioning for the nav bar div. So remember, the nav bar div, if we look inside the index page here, is up at the top inside of the header. Remember, we have a div with the class of wrapper that's holding the logo in the center. And then separate from that, I created another div now called navbar. And navbar is going to stretch 100% of the screen. It's going to be a bar. I'm going to set it fixed to the very top of the screen, so it's always up there. It's going to actually now position above the logo. And inside of it, there's a wrapper that's holding the nav into the center. Okay. So first we'll go ahead and start styling out that navbar div itself. And like I said, I want this to be positioned fixed at the top of the screen. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and set it to top 0, and we'll go ahead and say left 0, position it in the top left corner. We want it to take up 100% of the screen, so I'm going to say width 100%. Okay, and we want to make sure it appears on top of everything else, so I'm going to go ahead and set its z-index higher. We'll go ahead and say z-index 2. And then we're going to set a border just on the bottom of this element, and we'll make this one 1 pixel solid, and we'll do a medium gray color. We'll just say $CCC, and we'll go ahead and set anything inside of it to align in the center. We'll just say text align center. Okay. Next, let's go ahead and style the nav that's inside of navbar. So we'll just select the nav element. And for this one, we're going to add a border on the left-hand side only. And bear with me, this will make a bit more sense when we're finally done. I'll explain why we're doing this. We're going to add a border just to the left-hand side only, using that same medium gray color. And then all of the links inside of here we'd also like to style, so I'll go ahead and say navbar space nav space A to select all those links. Okay, So here I want these links to display side by side, but I want to be able to give them a width. And by default, links display inline, which will allow them to display side by side, but will not allow them to have a width. So I'm going to go ahead and set them to display inline dash block. And there are going to be, if I go back and count here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 links. So we're going to take 100% and divide it by the 6 links, which gives me 16.666 repeating. We'll set this to 16.6667%. Okay. And that should allow 6 of them to fit within the 100% width of the nav element. And we want to make sure that these guys have no margin between them. Okay. And we also want to set some padding around the elements as well. So for the padding, we're going to do 22 pixels for the top and bottom, and we'll go ahead and do 0 for the left and right. Whoops, almost forgot to close a semicolon here on the width. Don't forget your semicolons, right? And then we also want to set the text dash transform to make them uppercase. So no matter how I type the lettering, it will always uppercase them. And we want to set the color of these links to black to override the default, which would be a blue color, right? And we'll set them to text align center to align those links in the center. And we'll also set a border to the right. So this is going to be the same as this border here that I've set to the left of the nav element itself, but for all the links, I'm going to set the border to the right instead. So border dash right, 1 pixel solid, $CCC. Looks like we have an extra B there. Just get rid of that. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and set the text decoration to none, so the link will not have an underline. And we will set the font itself to 1M, and the font I'm going to use here is called and as a fallback we'll set to Arial and then just the generic sans serif font. Okay. Additionally, for this navigation, we want to visually show which page they're on, so we're going to add a selected style to links. So I'll just go ahead and say a.selected. So any link inside of nav that has the class of selected applied to it, we're going to make it slightly different here. We're going to set the background to medium gray. Okay, and we're going to set the color of the text to white. Okay, in fact, you know what? Let's make this a little darker. Let's set it to, we'll do like 333, something like that, almost black. All right, and then we'll have nice white text popping on top of that. For example, on the index page, this is really the about page. So for this navigation here, for this first link that says about here, I'm going to go ahead and add this class and set it equal to selected, just like that, and save it. Okay. And then the next thing I want to do is go to some of the other pages. So on the contact page here, if I scroll down to the navigation, I can add that class of selected to the contact link instead. So this way, when you visit the contact page, you'll be able to see that this is the selected page or the current page you're on. We'll go ahead and apply this to the other pages as well. We'll go to Market Report, and here for the link for Market Report, we'll add the class of selected and save. For the New Properties page, I'll scroll down, and here for the link for New Properties, I'll just paste in that class of selected only on the link for the New Properties. Okay. And last, we have the real estate listing page. So here I can apply the class here. A class selected. Okay, great. And we can even close these pages out. I'm all done with these. I also want to set the hover state. Okay, so the hover state here will be basically look like this. We'll say navbar space nav space a colon hover, like that. And this will affect the hover state on any links inside of the nav element. Okay. And here what we want to do when we hover over is we want to change the text color to white. All right. And here I'm going to also add a gradient color to the background. And once again, I've gone ahead and already generated this code here that I've already pre-built. And we'll just paste it in here under the color. Okay, perfect. And we'll go ahead and save. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that does. So here I'll come back and refresh. Okay. Now there is one thing that's kind of goofing up my measurement, because remember I set these guys all to 16% wide. However, I still have a space here. I have a physical keyboard space in between each element. So let me show you what I mean. So we set all of these links to display inline, but what I've done here is I've actually put a space here in between the links, and I'm just going to remove those at this time. So we removed all of the spaces here in between all the links, and then if we come back to the browser and refresh, okay, so that looks pretty good. But you'll notice that now that we've set this navigation bar here to fixed, what's happening is that the logo text here is actually getting pushed up behind that fixed nav bar. So what we want to do is we want to tell the logo text to actually get pushed down. So let's go back to style.css, and if we scroll down here, and we're going to go ahead and select that div with the ID of logo, and we're going to tell it to have some padding here, and we'll tell it to have 84 pixels of padding on the top, 0 on the left and right, and 0 on the bottom. And then here for the H1, we'll also set this guy not to have any margin. We're just going to remove the spacing between the text here, and we'll do the same. Now I think I'm eventually going to end up replacing the H1 and H2 with actual images. I'm going to actually put in the image of the logo as a background image here. But for now, we'll just leave this text in just so we can see a placeholder for where it will be. Next, I think I will add some subtle styling here to the details section in the footer, the bottom of the page. So let's jump back to style.css. And here in the details section, let's go ahead and select the div with the ID of details, and let's go ahead and give this guy a border on the top. So we'll say border dash top, and we'll set it to 1 pixel solid white, and this will add a nice little accent on top of the border. So we'll come back here and refresh, and now there's just a little white line here on the top that kind of gives us some dimension, adds a little highlight to the top edge here before it fades to gray. And then let's go ahead and style the footer section as well. So down here for the footer, we'll just go ahead and set the text to align into the center of the footer, and we'll go ahead and set the font size to be a little bit smaller than normal. We'll say 0.75 em, and we'll also add some padding here of 10 pixels inside of the footer, and we'll add a light gray background color here using the hexadecimal EEE, and we'll also add a border on the top here. And for this border, we'll make it a darker line. So this border will be between the top of the footer, and it'll be just below the details section. So we'll say 1 pixel solid, and we'll use the medium gray color there. Okay. So let's go ahead and save and refresh. Okay, excellent. So here we have the white border on top of the details section, and then we have a dark gray border on top of the footer section, and then the text is now centered and smaller, and we've given it just a light gray color here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I've gone ahead and went to the other pages, and I had to remove the spacing between the links on these other pages. I also had to go ahead and apply the same classes that we had applied on the index page to these other pages here. But you can see these are all starting to display quite nicely. Okay, and we'll go back later and add some styling to the table and the forms. But other than that, it's starting to come together. So since I'm satisfied with this, I'm going to hop back over and do a commit. So here we'll call git add. And we'll say style backgrounds for section, nav bar, and details. Okay, and we'll go ahead and do git push -u origin, nav bar, and background styles. And then we'll go ahead and check out master. And since we're satisfied with this and it is publishable, we can go ahead and merge in our changes to master. Okay, and we can also do a git push origin master.